So as we were talking about, if there's just like a few fields that you're interested in, you don't have that many records, potentially you could get an intern or a coordinator or something in your marketing department to go out and do the research. Go to LinkedIn and fill in the missing data for these people. But again, if they do that, you're going to have data entry errors, you're going to have people overlooking fields and things like that. It's cheap, relatively speaking, depending on how expensive your resource is, but it's not really a scalable option if you've got more than a handful of fields or just missing a few records, missing a few fields. So the other option is to use an offline data provider. And again, this is sort of using identifying a data provider you think can provide you the most coverage for what you need. But the issue there is then you have to export your data out, send it off, days later, maybe even longer, you get the data back. Now you have to load it in. And if you were to try to load it based on email address and you have duplicates in your database, then that data may not map to the correct or definitely not all the duplicates. It'll only map to one of the duplicate records based on email address. So offline data providers, while it can be like in a big batch update that you want to do, it can be tempting to do that. But again, keep in mind the latency of the time you send it off and getting it back and reviewing the data and so forth. And then the last one would be an option with an online data provider. So in this scenario, that you can do the enrichment in real time on specific sets of data. So you don't necessarily have to enrich your whole database at one time, budget allowing. You can just create segments. Maybe I'm going to be doing a campaign targeting a certain segment of my database. I want to make sure I've got the freshest, most complete data. So you would run just on that segment this month, and then next month go on to another segment. Another option that you have is if you want to maintain that the quality of your data rather than doing it in batches, you can have the enrichment run on a triggered basis when a new record gets created, so that you're able to actually populate all the appropriate fields so you can route that record to the right person. You can put them in the right segment, and you can communicate with them in the most personalized fashion available. So that's pretty much it. Oh, the one thing I would like to enrich that data, make sure then after you get the enriched data that you do normalize it, because you don't want a mixture of say 2-letter ISO codes for country and full country names as an example, or some names are all uppercase, some lowercase, and that's going to look like hell on your emails that you send out. So definitely, if you do use enrichment, make sure you're running normalization behind that, either normalization you've set up in Marketo, although Marketo is relatively limited to like string normalization, things like that. So again, you would either have to do it manually by exporting to Excel, blah, 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 or you could use one of the data enrichment providers, and that is something we do. So these are links to that field trip tool. It's free. Also, the dupe dive, which can identify how many duplicates you have in your database, and not just exact email like Marketo, but you can actually specify fuzzy matching criteria as well. So things like first name, last name, company name match. Because you can definitely get different formats for an email address, or maybe you have a personal email and a corporate email, but it's the same person. This actually is a great tool for getting kind of the steps that you could take to ensure that you've got most of those bad, unmanaged, undeliverable, unengaged records out before you start on your analyzing your fill rates and then enriching your data. And this, actually, some of these steps are in the presentation I just gave and the worksheet from Terminus.